Ever heard of mass kidnapping? Mass kidnapping is not a very common case in the present world. This brings the thought of how much people are willing to do to make money, how much we are willing to risk just to be able to live the life we envision. Risking is one thing, but putting one's life at risk at the cost of money is inhumane. To top it all, it was 26 children and an adult, 26 innocent souls struggling to make it out alive. At what cost? Greed. This was not only illegal but also immoral, devious, selfish, and inhumane. This is the case of the 1976 Chowchilla kidnapping. Others refer to it as the worst kidnapping in history. July 15, 1976 began like any other day for the kids at summer school, a regular school day as I would put it. However, it was not going to end like any other day. After a busy day, the bus driver picked up the kids as usual. There were 26 children on the bus on this specific day, 19 girls and 7 boys to be precise, their ages ranging between 5 and 14 years. On the way home, a van pulled up at the side of the road. It looked more like the van had a breakdown. The bus driver, a very kind-hearted person, pulled over to try and help the occupants of the van. Little did he know, this was the start of something he would live to remember, and not in a good way. Frank Edward Ray was a regular boy. He was born on the 21st of February 1921 in La Grande, California, to Frank Sr. and Marie Ray. He was one among 8 children born to that family. He was commonly known as Ed, as we will address him from this point of the video. At a young age, Ed and his family moved to Chowchilla in Madera County, California. He loved the town so much that even after becoming an adult, he decided to stay there instead of moving as most people do after graduating from high school. It is in this house that he got married and had sons. He was married to a woman called Odessa and was blessed with 2 sons, Glenn and Danny. For about 10 years, he was a successful farmer who grew corn and raised cattle for a living. Life seemed to be working out for them, maybe a little bit too perfect at the time in their small heaven. In the 1950s, Ed decided to become a bus driver for the local school. He loved the job and was very much respected and appreciated by both the staff and the children who took his bus. This being because he was hardworking, dedicated to his job, and very respectful. Things were working out in his life per se. Things seemed or were very normal till the 15th of July, 1976, as Ed alighted from the bus going to try and help those in the van. The unspeakable happened. 3 men emerged from the van. Their faces were covered in pantyhose, and one of them was carrying a rifle. On seeing the rifle, he was turned into complying, as he was not ready to face his demise, at least not yet. The strangers told Ed to step off the wheel as he took over the control of the bus. One drove the school bus, the other pointed the rifle at the hostages, and the other man drove the white van that was behind them. The man drove the bus for a while before they got to an area where there was a bamboo forest and tall grass. He steered off the road towards a dry riverbank before stopping. Some may ask if no vehicles were passing by to spot the bus. The grass and bamboo trees were so tall that they were able to conceal the bus for a good distance. The van parked closely next to it, with the back of the van facing the door to the bus. This was because they did not want the tracks of the kids being left behind. They then transferred the kids together with Ed from the bus to the back of the van. The bus was then abandoned as it was easier to be tracked as compared to an unknown van. They then drove for about 12 more hours. These were horrifying hours, being they had no food nor water. All this time, Ed, being the only adult in the van, tried to keep the kids calm. The older kids also helped in this by trying to sing songs together, but this did not work. It was too hard to ignore what was going on, not forgetting the summer heat. This was all beyond imagination, being cramped up in a very small space at the back of the van with no resources, restlessness, and the extreme heat. However, worse things awaited them. As all this was happening, an alarm was raised in the town of Chowchilla. The families of the victims were in great panic. I mean, one kid missing is something different, but 26 and the driver, that was not a mere coincidence. That was a sign that something very wrong was going on. By then, a missing kids report had been filed and the police immediately started their investigations. The parents could not do much under such circumstances, but they helped with the little they could do, like explaining to the police the route the bus took every day. It was not long before the police found the abandoned bus shortly after 30 FBI agents arrived at the crime scene, and an intense search began. After hours of traveling, the van finally stopped. It had reached its destination again, somewhere unknown to the victims. The three men started taking the victims off the van one by one, systematically. One person would be taken off and close the door before they came back for the next, step by step. Ed was the first one to be taken off the van, then the kids would follow. They then asked each kid their name and age as they put them down. By this time, they probably thought they were not in California after such a long drive. The kids explained that they were taken to a hidden location. They accessed it through a wooden ladder, being it was a hole that they later came to learn was an old track trailer. It had been put into a dugout spot that was about 12 feet deep. Inside the track trailer were essentials, makeshift toilets, mattresses, food, and water. This just showed that they were going to be there for a good while. Some fans were also available and worked as sources of ventilation, according to Jennifer Brown Hyde, who was one of the victims. This was something they had spent months planning, and by this time, their execution was to the latter. This also clearly indicated that the kidnappers were planning to keep them there for a while. The kidnappers pulled up the ladder and told them they would be back for them. They then closed the lid of the trailer and left them in total darkness. They then heard something that sounded like thuds on top of the trailer. Their kidnappers were covering up the trailer with dirt, probably to bar them from escaping or to make the trailer more camouflaged with the environment. This was burying them alive. On realizing what was happening, the victims started panicking. I mean, wouldn't you? There was the fear of the unknown. How long would it be before they ran out of supplies? How long were they planning to keep them there? The food and water were not much. The makeshift toilets would soon start stinking. They might have even suffocated in there if the fan stopped functioning. This was horrific. Imagine starting a day in the most normal way and having it end with you seeing an end to your life. Making it worse was that it was children. What was the motive behind all this? It is so hard to comprehend how anyone would willingly put people, more so children, in such a situation. This makes one wonder if empathy is just but a word to other people. As anyone in Ed's position would do, he did his best to keep the kids calm. It would have been impossible to get out of there if hysteria broke and the children started having panic attacks. Michael Marshall, the eldest kid in the group, was helping Ed in trying to figure out a way. They started pushing the lid of the track trailer, trying to see if they could get themselves out. This was, however, to no avail. The lid was too heavy. They would probably be stuck down there for a while, at least before they found another escape. They retracted from the mission of lifting the lid and sat down to think of a strategy. In the meantime, he told the children to eat the available food, take water, use the makeshift toilet, and try to rest. This was to reduce the panic and help them regain strength. This must have been stressful for him, as the only adult with 26 children counting on him. Good thing Michael was there, as much as he was also a kid. A couple of hours later, no solution had been found. The food and water had run out, and the fan used for ventilation failed. Keep in mind, this was in July with the heat. The panic arose. They believed they would not make it. Ed had to be more creative as fast as possible before they started suffocating and passing out. Slowly, the roof of the truck trailer started to sink. Things were not looking good for them. Due to the anxiety the kids were experiencing at this time, one boy started kicking blocks from under the pillars. The walls started bowing in. The volume became less. thus less air. The seams were breaking. Dust from inside the walls started leaking in. The survivors state that at this point, they were giving up. They were convinced this was the end of their short lives, as much as the kids had given up. Ed and Michael were determined to fight to the end, even where there was no hope. They were not going to give up. They would have rather died trying than not trying at all. This could not be the end. They piled up the mattresses they had on top of each other to create easy access to the roof. They were going to give it one more try. After that, they alternated in pushing on the ceiling to loosen the hatch. This was also to disintegrate the soil on the roof. Hope rose in them when Michael was able to remove the cover. The latch had opened. It was not much, being the gap was less than a foot wide, but it was progress. The small things that make up hope. A ray of light came from the outside, and there was a hope that they would be able to see another day. This also improved the ventilation. With enough oxygen circulating, the energy they had in them increased. This is when they realized that the roof had not only been covered by soil. 2 track batteries on top of the lid were weighed around 100 pounds each, and the 2 batteries were covered with a wooden box. Michael pushed till the batteries and wooden box moved. He did not stop there. He continued to push. As it turned out, there was more debris on top of the track trailer. He was a strong man, a savior to the rest of the team. He did this despite being dehydrated, hungry, and exhausted. He eventually managed to push the lid open. The relief that came after this is beyond imaginable. They were free. They were out of the hellhole. This was on the 16th of July, 1976, at 8 a.m., a new dawn and a walk to freedom. They had been in the track trailer for about 16 hours. The next task was to figure out where they were, how they would get out of there, and how they would be able to contact the authorities for help. They were held hostage in a quarry in Livermore, California, near Shadow Cliffs Regional Recreational Area. This is approximately 100 miles from Chowchilla. They started walking and came across a security guard who was willing to help them. Ed told him that they were lost and explained where they were from. The guard then called the police, who took them to the nearest place that could shelter them all. They were examined by medical professionals and given something to eat as the police interrogated them, trying to figure out what happened. 36 hours after their disappearance, they were taken back to Chowchilla, where their families were eagerly waiting for them. Convictions. After the kidnappers went home, they slept before asking for the ransom. They were planning to ask for $5 million as ransom for the kidnapped kids. When they woke up, they were shocked to find the news of the kidnapping all over the news stations. The news stated that the victims had been found and freed. They had probably started budgeting on what they would do with the money, forgetting the power of the law. The 3 kidnappers were James Schoenfelds, Richard Schoenfelds, and Frederick Newhall Woods IV. The Woods family owned the quarry, California Rock and Gravel Quarry. He therefore had unlimited access to the property and could use whatever he wanted at whatever time. This was not the first crime. Woods and the Schoenfelds were involved in crime together. They had previously been convicted of motor vehicle theft, for which they were sentenced to probation. The FBI obtained a search warrant for Woods' home. In his room, they found so many things insinuating they had been planning for this for several months. There was the ransom note, maps, notes, receipts from the van and trailer hair, a riffle, and a burger wrapper in which they had written the names of the kids they had kidnapped. The notes explained their whole plan. They had planned to ask for the ransom to be dropped on top of Santa Cruz Mountains at night by a plane. This was so they would be able to escape without being tracked. One of those receipts found was that of a storage unit that they had rented. In the storage unit, the FBI found the van that was used for the kidnapping and a getaway vehicle that had been painted black so that it could not easily be spotted in the dark. This led to an immediate issuing of an arrest warrant. However, they were nowhere to be found. 8 days later, Richard surrendered. 2 weeks later, James and Woods were arrested in 2 different locations. Later on, James confessed that as much as they hailed from wealthy families, they were struggling financially and were drowning in debt. They needed more than one victim to garner the amount of money they thought they needed. They decided to kidnap children as the state would be willing to pay their ransom and they wouldn't have tried fighting back. They all pled guilty to kidnapping for ransom and robbery. They, however, refused to plead guilty over inflicting bodily harm. They were tried for infliction of bodily harm and sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. This sentence was overturned after an appeal was filed. It was found that the cuts and bruises found on the bodies of the victims were not enough to establish that it was an infliction of bodily harm. They were then sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The Schoenfeld brothers were released on parole between 2012 and 2015. Woods was denied parole as he was still engaged in several crimes, even while behind bars. In 2022, he was finally released on parole. Ed passed away in 2012. Chowchilla named its sports and leisure park Edward Ray Park after him, and they declared every February the 26th a holiday to commemorate his heroic act. It is said that the kids, who are now adults, have shown signs of trauma to date that was inflicted during that time. They showed radical fears of things such as cars, the dark, and even the wind. One good thing about this case is that justice was served and the kidnappers had a good time in jail. This was such a devastating incident that I would not wish to befall on any human. Thank you for watching.